Welcome everybody. I'm Julia Hingwood. I'm from the CEFC and I look after infrastructure at the CEFC. Welcome to our webinar, which is on the pathway to Airport Sustainability Report. I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on where we are based and also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land across Australia. I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today we're going to run through a couple of things before we start the findings summary from James. So initially I'm going to talk about housekeeping. You can ask questions at any time through the webinar portal. The questions will be answered at the end. And also at the end of the webinar you'll be directed to a quick survey. After the webinar you'll be emailed a copy of the webinar and slides. The presenters today joining me on the webinar are James Herbert, who's the Principal Sustainability Consultant and Infrastructure and Precinct Sustainability Lead at AECOM, and Andrew Maskey, who's the Environment and Sustainability Advisor for Brisbane Airport. The agenda will be a short introduction from myself, and then we're going to go through some key findings through James, and then we're going to get some live case studies from Brisbane Airport via Andrew. So we initially at CEFC engaged the AECOM to provide CEFC with some insights into how airports work and the key areas which CEFC should target for investment to achieve decarbonisation. This started as an internal piece of work to inform CEFC's approach to airports. But as we progressed it and discussed some findings with airports, it seemed to generate wider interest, and so we decided to publish the findings. This helped us understand where CEFC should focus, and AECOM started by collecting global data on energy use in airports. As you can see from the chart on the left, this illustrated that surface access for passengers and staff is a key cause of emissions, coming second only to the aircraft and contributing 31% of emissions. We then explored energy consumption and emissions by activity across the actual infrastructure at the airports rather than the vehicles coming in and out of the airport. And this chart, which is the one on the right, illustrates that the terminal buildings were the highest users, but it also pointed to other sort of key areas that could be focused on across the airport. We have got another report on best practice initiatives for energy in buildings, so we decided to focus our particular attention in this report on non-standard upgrades, things that are specific to airports. We looked across also at the carbon profile for a typical airport. We looked at a global average, North American average, European average and Asia Pacific average. And we noted that the Australian Asia Pacific sort of area had a higher scope 1 and 2 emission profile than the counterparts in Europe and North America. This is probably driven by surface access. We're not really across the bottom of that detail, but there's a lot more car driving to airports in our region. It also showed that the emissions are quite high, even if you're looking at just the scope 1 and 2 emissions. So everyone with airports, the first thing they talk about is aircraft and how much they're creating in the way of emissions. But if you actually take the airport infrastructure itself, they're high users on their own. And what I wanted to illustrate here was, you know, Heathrow scope 1 and 2, so they're 220,591 emissions per annum. A large regional shopping centre is 7,000 per annum. A 50-storey office block, 90,000 per annum. So you're in quite a sort of high scale of emissions just from those assets, so there's quite a lot that can be done with those. So in addition to exploring ways that can reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions, we also think that the airport infrastructure itself can play a meaningful role in reducing the scope 3 emissions by enabling things at the airport that can help with that. So we wanted to get this report to a point where it could be used to guide ways in which this has been done globally and to start a conversation on ways to drive down emissions in airports. It explores opportunities across landside and airside, including the ability of the airport to influence the Scope 3 emissions. And we hope that you'll find this discussion as useful as we have at CEFC. I'm going to hand over now to James Herbert, who's going to talk through some of the key findings. James briefly he's been at AECOM for the past 5 years, where he is responsible for driving technological, behavioural and process change in infrastructure assets, both in Australia and overseas. He specialises in the provision of sustainability services and takes an integrated and innovative approach to embed sustainability measures, reduce aviation sector emissions and safeguard airport assets. I'll hand over now.
Great, thanks Julia. Let me start by saying it was a privilege for myself and AECOM to be involved in the development of this guide for CEFC. For those who aren't aware of the work that AECOM does, we're a global provider of technical services to airport owners, investors, airlines and aviation clients, leading and supporting programs for airports of all sizes and forms. Our aim was to create a guide that both regional and major airports could use to identify and develop low energy and emissions technologies for implementation. The intent was underpinned by an appreciation that many airports around Australia have already made significant strides to reduce emissions and improve resilience in recent years, whilst understanding that there is still a long way to go towards the transition towards a low carbon economy. Our approach was to principally leverage AECOM's global experience with broader industry case studies to understand some of the global aviation technological trends and their applicability within an Australian context. We started by looking at the scope of opportunity, so the measures or initiatives that will provide the greatest emission savings within airports' control or influence. This allowed us to select the 15 initiatives detailed in this guide. As Julia mentioned prior to now, we focused on the airside and landside components of operations, and for anybody who's looking for any energy efficiency measures in terminals, I'd highly recommend the Energy in Buildings 50 Best Practice Initiatives Guide. So we appreciate that not all airports are the same. Airports may be extremely large or very small. Some may have large volumes of passengers and freight and aircraft passing through them, whilst others may not. And some may have multiple functions in the context of local, regional and international communities. It's for this reason why we recognise that not all the initiatives in this guide will be applicable to all airports or airport developments. To assist in the selection of initiatives, we included a number of helpful indicators in this guide, pictured here, to assist in the selection of initiatives for further investigation. Our 15 selected emissions reduction measures highlight opportunities for airport emission savings across, are based on current best practice technology and methodology. We've categorised these into categories of renewable energy and storage, electrification and fuel switching, energy efficiencies and waste management. A number of these initiatives have broader sustainability and resilience benefits. To focus quickly on just a few of these, we have central utility plants which take advantage of economies of scale and enable the capture and reuse of energy that would typically be otherwise wasted. We have on-site solar and battery energy storage. Combined, these can maximise the use of generated solar energy, increase resilience during blackouts and reduce peak energy electrical demand. The remaining grid power can be substituted with renewable energy using a power purchase agreement which funds clean energy providers. We've got electrification of ground support equipment. This reduces the reliance on petrol and diesel airside vehicles, whilst fixed ground power and preconditioned air reduces the need for aircraft to run auxiliary power units, or APUs, when stationary at the gate. We've got sustainable aviation fuel, including biofuels, which reduce the carbon intensity of fuel and enhances supply chain sustainability. Surface access improvements can take many forms and can reduce emissions associated with idling and traffic build-up. This can also stimulate mode shift to clean air transport modes. We have aircraft and airside upgrades, may increase aircraft efficiencies and significantly reduce Scope 3 airport emissions associated with landing and takeoff cycles. And new baggage handling systems can improve security and reliability of baggage handling through the airport. And then finally, we've got waste to energy plants and waste minimisation can reduce the amount of waste to landfill and associated greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, we don't have quite the time today to go run through every initiative, but I thought I'd provide you with a snapshot of some of the case studies covered as part of our research. Starting with baggage handling systems, these are fantastically complex systems which are often overlooked as they are hidden away from public view. As part of Abu Dhabi's new midfield terminal project, a tote-based independent carrier system, or an ICS system, was adopted for the baggage handling system. As the name suggests, bags are transported individually by totes or trays, allowing for faster baggage movement and start-stop features when not in use. The system provides a streamlined security process, enhanced passenger experience, and provides greater redundancy with less maintenance required. The midfield terminal is designed with a maximum capacity of 30 million passengers per year. The independent carrier system will feature 25 kilometres of baggage conveyor belt and is capable of handling 19,200 bags an hour. Through our investigations, we estimate that compared to an older baggage handling system, which has an electrical demand of approximately 520 watts per metre of conveyor, the MTC's baggage handling system will require approximately 124 watts per metre of conveyor. These figures will be subject to change dependent upon the final build and the way the system is operated. Inclusive of all systems, not just the conveyors, we estimate that the new baggage handling system will provide 40% energy saving. We calculated the cost of the new baggage handling system to be approximately $12,000 per metre. This system has also been replicated at San Francisco International Airport in their new T1 terminal, which has in part recently been opened. This system might suggest this technology is best applied in new terminal buildings, their extensive size and need for existing baggage systems to remain operational during the build. When retrofitting, any new systems will require extensive planning to reduce this operational disruption. In 2018, Rotterdam The Hague Airport became the first airport in the world to use a baggage handling system with intelligent autonomous vehicles for individual luggage transport instead of a traditional conveyor belt system. In 2019, the trial was announced as successful and is now being further rolled out across the airport. Each individual vehicle carries a single bag and the system is designed to grow alongside the airport. It is designed to use up to 50% less energy compared to traditional systems, and in the case of Rotterdam The Hague Airport, the vehicles are largely powered by renewable energy, helping to create a zero emissions baggage handling system. The system also enables complete track and trace of each piece of luggage. In 2015, Seattle Tacoma Airport started a program to install nearly 570 electric vehicle charging points, with the aim to have them available at every gate by 2021, costing around $45 million to install. The finalised project is expected to, per annum, reduce operational fuel costs by over $4 million, prevent 10,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce annual fuel consumption by nearly 1 million gallons. This has led to airlines who operate the GSE adopting eGSE vehicles at the airport. Alaska Airlines was the first to introduce electric vehicles at the airport, eliminating around 2,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. The airline is aiming to convert 44% of its ground fleet to electric by the end of this year. A similar story has been seen at Boston Logan International Airport, where a loan agreement from the Massachusetts Port Authority, or Massport, provided Delta Airlines with the capital to purchase electric equipment for use at Terminal A. To provide the EV charging infrastructure, the airport secured funding from a Voluntary Airport Low Emissions Program, or VAIL loan for short. 1,200 electric ground support vehicles have been bought through agreements made with airliners and the Massachusetts Port Authority. Just like Boston Logan International Airport, London Heathrow Airport has also undergone an electrification transformation in their pursuit for more sustainable alternatives. Here you can see one of the electric pushback tugs used at T5. Operated by remote control, these tugs can tow up to 250 tonnes and fix automatically to the aircraft in around 10 seconds. The tugs can be charged and stored at the gates where powered by renewables can provide emission savings of up to 100%. Prices typically range for the Motok, which you can see pictured there, from $61,000 to $79,000 USD, which is pretty cost effective if you consider a typical used tug may cost approximately $50,000 USD, and that there is potentially reduced need for personnel needed during operation. In 2015, Los Angeles International Airport completed construction of their new central utility plant, consisting of a 4-story building for plant and staff offices, above ground cylindrical chilled water storage tank, and a low-rise structure with maintenance shops and cooling towers. The plant included electric-driven centrifugal chillers, heat recovery boilers, primary and secondary chilled water pumps, cooling towers, and thermal energy storage. It included an 8.4 megawatt cogeneration plant to provide electricity and waste heat for heat to drive additional steam-driven chillers. The systems and components were designed to achieve a LEED Gold rating, and it replaced a 50-year-old plant. Savings include a reported $10 million USD per year and a 25% energy saving. Understandably, CUPs on the scale of the one pictured require extensive planning if being retrofitted for use in existing buildings. As the Deputy Executive Director of LAX, Roger Johnson, put it, the intricacies of the project are like performing open heart surgery on a patient while they are running a marathon. Ground source heat pumps can provide a reliable source of heating and cooling through a network of cores buried deep underground. Opened in 2013, Christchurch International Airport's new $225 million 3-story integrated terminal uses artesian bore water ground source heat pumps to provide heating and cooling. Testing on the system in 2014 to 2015 determined that it was providing 6.7 megawatt hours of energy for every 1 megawatt hour of energy consumed for the central chiller system, and then certain modifications could further improve the efficiency by around 11%. This excludes the energy required for pumping. The cost of the system at the time above a conventional boiler system was approximately $712,000, with a payback period of around 2 years due to the energy efficiency of the system. Since then, installation prices have actually dropped. By 2019, Christchurch Airport estimated that the system and associated operational processes have reduced emissions by 31% since 2013. Because of this success, the airport is replicating the technology in the rest of the terminal, decommissioning 2 diesel and 2 liquefied petroleum gas boilers. The airport predicts future savings of $522,000 annually and a 25% reduction on current emissions. There are a few other examples where geothermal energy has been used in airports internationally. In Nashville International Airport, they've utilised a 43-acre former quarry filled with water to provide cooling for their terminal. The geothermal loop replaced 3 1,100-ton cooling towers and has a 50-year lifespan. It provides a 40% reduction in energy, saving 1.3 kilowatts per hour and 30 million gallons of water. It costs $10.4 million USD to build and saves $430,000 USD annually. So in summary, without looking too far into the future, there are already a number of existing energy efficiency measures in the market. These have been tried and tested for use in airports throughout the world and outlined in the Pathway to Airport Sustainability Guide. Many of these technologies have the added co-benefit of increasing airport resilience and lowering operating costs. As these technologies evolve, we expect capital costs to reduce and adoption to become more mainstream. For the larger initiatives, for example, central utility plants and baggage handling systems, careful planning and stakeholder involvement is needed to minimise disruption to operations. During planning for any major development, sustainability measures should be considered and implemented through detailed analysis of risk and opportunity. This includes responding to the impacts of climate change, with a very pertinent example featuring in last week's news, where development of the third runway at Heathrow Airport was rejected on the grounds that plans did not adequately address the impacts of climate change. To drive performance, we recommend not just simply assessing low energy measures in isolation, but ascertaining and quantifying their broader sustainability benefits in meeting ESG commitments through the use of sustainability governance frameworks and voluntary rating schemes. There are a number of voluntary rating schemes on the market, including GRESB, ISCA and Green Star, all of which can be applied to guide the adoption of technologies in airport development and operations. So the future of aviation looks bright. Innovations like the use of battery-powered aircraft, hydrogen and new biofuels will seek to reduce the carbon footprint of the industry further. And where funding can be secured, we believe that there are extensive opportunities in the Australian market to trial new and emerging technologies in partnership with industry and academia. To close, we really hope that the Pathway to Airport Sustainability Guide is an eye-opener to those new to the industry and a useful reference to those who know the industry well. And we hope that this guide will act as a catalyst for further energy and emissions reduction discussions in the near future.
Okay. Well, thank you, James. That was really interesting, and I hope that by pulling out a couple of examples, people are getting a feel for what's inside the report. Now we're going to hand over to Andrew Maskey, who's the Environment and Sustainability Advisor at Brisbane Airport. He's been working within the aviation environmental sustainability field for over a decade, and at Brisbane Airport, where he has been a key driver of sustainability in the airport in various areas of the business, from climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies to circular economy and waste reduction projects. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Julia, and hi everybody. Thank you, Julia, for inviting me today to chat, just to give an example of some of our emission reduction examples. So today I'll have a quick overview of what our Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions look like, for a bit of context, and then I will jump into just a couple of examples, probably smaller examples of what we've done to increase our sustainability at the airport. Jumping to our emissions, so for FY19, BAC, like many other airports, do participate in the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program. It's a good way to allow us to annually measure our Scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions that's consistent across aviation. So using the ASCO tool that's provided through the ACA program, we can understand and annually benchmark if our emission reduction projects are reducing our overall emissions. So for us, looking at the slide, our Scope 1 and 2s, so Scope 2 emissions account for 94% of the total, with Scope 1 emissions looking mainly from refrigerant losses and airside equipment, and our terminals being the main source of Scope 2 emissions. Looking at our Scope 3, like many airports, the top 5 we've got there are from aircraft landing and takeoff, APU usage, tin electricity, and passenger and visitor transport. So just for a bit of quick understanding, jumping into our first example is our landfill diversion project. So this commenced in February last year. So this is really focusing on food waste. Food waste was determined to be 40% of our annual off-site tonnages across the whole of the airport. So we investigate different alternatives that are out in the market, and we found this Enriched 360 product that basically just takes food waste from airport food and beverage retailers, to dehydrate it and macerate it into fertiliser. So to date, in one of our precincts, we have 12 tonnes of waste has been diverted from 9 retailers. So this system and service is provided by a company called Emission 360, which is based out of Melbourne, and they have actually arranged an emissions reduction fund project through Austrade to enable the company to generate ACCUs, or Australian Carbon Credit Units, for running this on their site. Looking at the machine we have in the picture, that's the one we have in one of our waste compounds. That takes about 200 kilos a day, and from that we can abate up to 80 tonne a year. Jumping into probably more wider for airports is our landside electric busing service. So this service commenced in May 2018 and provides 3 dedicated services across the airport. Knowing Brisbane Airport is 2,700 hectares in size. Between our one stop, which is our Skygate retail precinct, to the domestic terminal, it's 15 kilometres. So we've had to provide several limited services to cater for airport staff, passengers and retail consumers. So to date, we have 11 buses running that network and have travelled over 2 million kilometres. During the procurement phase of the buses, I was in discussions with Austrade to see if this project could count as well as an emissions reduction fund project under the transportation rules. And it was successful, and we basically based our emissions reduction requirements based on the information and data we gathered through the initial incumbent bus fleet, which is a Euro 5 fleet. So basically taking a litres per kilometre and transferring that to a kilowatt per kilometre trade. And we basically came out with, all right, we've actually get about 500 to 750 tonnes a year of carbon abated, and to date we have abated 1,500 tonnes. So, and from that we can actually generate our ACCUs as well and use that as offsets, or we can actually sell that on the secondary market, which we haven't decided as yet. But that's something we can do in the future. But that's my two examples. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm happy to answer questions. But yeah, back to you, Julia.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really interesting, and I hope that was useful for everybody. We've got a question and answer scheduled in now, session scheduled in now, and we have a couple of questions that have come through. Please feel free to put any questions for Andrew, myself or James into the question manager online, and we'll answer them as we go. So maybe we'll kick off with the first one, which is what are some of the key barriers for the uptake of sustainability measures in airports? I think I'll hand over to you, James, maybe to start that, and then maybe Andrew for some colour on the ground.
Yeah, so I think as part of our research, what we found, and you know, it's no surprise if you look at the examples that we've used today, a lot of them are actually American examples, and one of the key enablers to those American examples. And it's not just because AECOM are an American company as to why we've used those examples, just for the record. One of the key enablers for those is that there is this VAIL funding available, and also that the airports themselves are often state-owned and funded, so they can directly link back to whatever policy is in place for that particular state. In an Australian context, most of our airports are privately owned, our major airports are privately owned. And so therefore, you know, there's perhaps a little bit of discontinuity, I suppose, between what we plan for and what we actually deliver at a state and at a federal level as well. One of the other reasons, I suppose, one of the other key barriers for sustainability measures in airports is planning. Airports are very, very complex pieces of assets, and you know, they're really, really fascinating once you get into the nitty-gritty of how they actually operate. And because there are so many different components, and because each of those components still need to remain operational often when the airport's being retrofitted, means that often small pieces of works are often preferred over major development works that potentially might, you know, shut down a terminal, for instance, or a particular part of the airport. As a result, you know, when you're looking at some of those centralised measures like the baggage handling system and the central utility plant, it's often quite difficult to get those outcomes unless you've got some, you know, a development on the scale that can accommodate those upgrades. So often it comes down to planning, and often, you know, there's a tendency to potentially you know, look at these I suppose various asset upgrades in isolation. And so yeah, one of my key recommendations is to, you know, make sure that when you're looking at asset upgrades, that you're looking at the broader context, and that's not just you know, that might be the transport master plan or the energy master plan for the particular airport, and seeing how that development will align to it in the future, and see how that particular asset might be adapted even in the future. Andrew, have you got any further comments on that question?
I completely agree. So from this point, it's almost starting with the smaller pilot projects and to demonstrate its feasibility and applicability across the airport, knowing that we are massive assets and long-term assets. So the decisions we make really have to have that long-term view in it. So that's why that risk aversion comes in as well. So the proper risk assessments and all that required, and things just don't move quick. So, for example, that landside busing example, that took about 12 months for us prior to even going to procurement, just to get our head around what are the risks associated with that if it breaks down, et cetera, et cetera. So the due diligence is huge for these ones. So that's about right. We're finding that with our being privatised airports and our investors, financial returns is a key component as well. And we're finding now that it's becoming a lot easier to get our projects across the line because sustainability is now becoming a lot more financially viable. So tagging things 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was very difficult to get things across the line because the return just wasn't there. We find the markets are shifting, technologies are getting cheaper, the social aspect as well. So we're finding, particularly if they are looking at how the Extinction Rebellion, the social pressures, is actually pushing a lot of relaxation on some of the risk requirements with investors and wanting to ensure that what we are doing, we're becoming a sustainable investment for them as well. So we're finding that shift is continually happening, and we find Oregon's going to get easier as time goes on to get a lot of these projects across the line.
Thanks, Andrew and James. And I think one of the things we have found in our discussions with a lot of airports is prioritising of these projects over other projects, because all of the airports are undergoing such expansion in Australia at the moment, and people are pretty stretched on the ground at the airports. So I think some of the discussions we had indicated the project teams just didn't have enough people to actually put proposals together for some of the sustainability measures, because they were so busy meeting the growth demands at the airport, or the new safety requirements, the new security screening processes, and setting up those land buffers between entries and things like that. And all of those things were sort of shifting these other projects to a more deprioritised position. And we were hoping with this report to make it a little bit easier to sift through quickly what you could actually look at and target for a quick win maybe, or have in mind what might have been the experience at other airports. And that's why we grouped in the report. We did a summary table on page 10 where we grouped the CapEx as a percent of asset value, the payback in years, and the emissions impact, so you could sort of glance through and get a sort of quick flush look at what might be impactful without doing the research on every single one of those items yourselves, and then maybe delve deeper into the items that sound interesting out of that list. Was kind of where we were coming from with the report. So I think all of that's pretty useful in terms of trying to get to a better solution for everyone and save people time when people are kind of stretched on the ground. We've got another question. I think this is one for you, Andrew. Is landside busing a Scope 1 or Scope 3 emission for VAC?
It actually went from a Scope 1 to a Scope 2. So that's where the reduction was identified. So using a fuel, which we counted for as our Scope 1, and came to an electric charging solution, so that transferred it to a Scope 2. And so while there is some residual emissions there, it's significantly less.
Okay, that's good. And another question we've had in is, do you think a NABERS rating system could help in driving energy efficiency emissions like other commercial sectors? And I mean, we certainly have looked at rating systems across airports. Usually we look probably to an ISCA rating for the whole of the airport, and then which is an infrastructure-specific rating, and then we might look to a NABERS rating on some of the buildings within the airport. So there's sort of different ways you can do that. Unlike the NABERS rating system for office buildings, there's no sort of mandated minimum for government tenancies and things like that. So I think it's very important. I think it does drive behaviour change. I think there's more that could be done on that. I think there's probably a few fronts. I think Andrew or James, maybe James, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of voluntary rating systems and tools that can be used on a multitude of different areas of the airport. So we've recently come off the back of doing the Green Star Communities rating for Sydney Airport, which achieved a 4-star rating. And what we found through that process was that it was less applicable to those things which are typically back of house, so airside initiatives, but more applicable to those front of house things. So you could argue that, in those back-of-house elements that maybe ISCA is the more appropriate tool, and in the front-of-house Green Star might be the more appropriate tool in those instances. With regards to neighbours, I think it's not a bad idea at all, the neighbours for airports. There's a number of other things that are out there, but there's, basics as well, that airports will typically try and comply with in part. Andrew, is there any up your way that you use?
I can tell you what, we've investigated and we do the Green Star communities as well. So we achieved a 4-star back in 2014, and we're looking to hopefully achieve a 5-star this year. We've investigated ISCA as well for a couple of major projects, and we've postponed it for the moment. We do GRES as well, so we do neighbours for some of our buildings because they're government tenants. We've got green buildings performance, which is what I'm sort of looking at as well for the terminals, because it has there's so many things out there. The CDP, there's so many things out there that we can do. I think something streamlined as well would be nice and easy, because it actually chews up a lot of time to have different value for different people. So it does depend on where maybe the investors or the senior management actually decide to have their interest. But for us, the Green Build community was a good start. It showed basically what a sustainable community can look like, and we can sell that. But then from a green buildings performance, we want to really look at our other ways we can improve the performance of our terminals. So, and this will just keep going. So it'd be interesting to see if something can be sorted and then basically be a consistent approach to all airports. That would be fantastic.
And just for those on the line who don't know, when we're talking about an ISCA rating, it's the IS rating scheme, which is a Australia and New Zealand rating system for evaluating sustainability across planning, design, construction and operational phases of infrastructure projects. So a bit more comprehensive than the pure Green Star, but the idea is to be able to compare diverse infrastructure assets for their sustainability performance when it's quite difficult to do because they're very sort of bespoke and different from each other. Thanks, Andrew. Andrew, you're pretty popular. We've got another question for you, which is what percentage of waste has been diverted from landfill as a result of the macerator? And is this a Brisbane Airport-owned asset that is used by tenants and retailer as well as Brisbane Airport?
So that percentage from that, as it was a pilot in our retail precinct, that is actually a 50% diversion rate from the precinct. And it is a as a service option that we've done with the Risk 360 company. There is an option you can buy it yourself, but we went for it as a service just to pilot it through. And it is used. How the system works is basically the retailers drop off the food into the machine in the bucket adjacent to the machine, as well as our BAC officers. Then our cleaners handle the food into the machine and the fertilizer out of the machine from a health and safety and a hygiene management process. And we're now looking at how we can roll out the terminals, as the terminals are a bit more high risk and have higher potential for failure as well. So we're sort of working through that process now.
Thank you. I think something that we've sort of seen coming up too is, have you found that airports are driven to improve their sustainability performance by competition against one another? And I mean, I don't know, I feel like this is something you kind of need to work with together on, but awareness raising is an important part of it. So, I think the carbon footprinting, some airports are sort of led earlier with that and setting emission reduction targets. Some have been sort of slower on that front, but I actually think it's something probably airports should work together on. That's my view at CEFC, but I might hand over to James because he looks like he's got something to say about this.
I suppose there's nothing like a bit of healthy competition to drive things forward in the industry, and I suppose with the airport carbon accreditation scheme, that's quite a good one really, where it rates people by levels. Obviously we mentioned about the other voluntary rating schemes as well. what you tend to often find is that once one airport kind of trials it, then a lot of the other ones will follow. So, Andrew, do you find in your experience that there's that competitive spirit?
It's good. It's funny. It is and it isn't. So it is from a perspective because we like to be seen to be the best, of course. But I can see now with some counterparts online listening now that we do help each other as well. So there's always some assistance. So if someone finds something, we want to share that out because in the end, we're trying to, while we're trying to improve our performance, we're trying to improve the reputation and performance of the industry. As I said, ACI and our carrier are pushing the international targets for this, and we're trying to adhere to that. So I think overall, while we love to be the best, we all want to help each other.
Thank you. Got another one here. So, are there substantial government or non-government funding options for energy efficiency upgrades at airports? So, my understanding is there probably isn't a huge series of grants or funds available for this. CEFC may be fairly unique in the government side in being able to provide debt funding to airports to do things that are going to improve the sustainability performance or the energy efficiency at the airport. Obviously, commercial lenders are able to do that and do that through sustainability-linked loans, and we've seen quite a few. I think the airport sector probably led the sustainability-linked loans that have been done in Australia to date, because I think they came through Adelaide, Sydney and Brisbane, which is great to see, not Brisbane, Queensland airports. So I think both the private and government through CEFC, I'm not aware of other government organisations doing anything with airports, but I think the private sector is showing a pretty healthy interest in this as well. So certainly at CEFC, we're happy to talk to people who want to talk about energy efficiency and what financing needs they may have for that. And I'm certainly aware that the commercial banks and lenders are really keen to do this as well, and that's evidenced by, I think, at least 3 of the big 4 participating in sustainability-linked loans for airports in Australia.
Yeah, I think with the sustainability-linked loans, they often, they'll derive the interest rate that the airport will pay on that loan depending on a number of KPIs. What we're still, I suppose, yet to see from some of these loans is actually kind of what that's actually driving in the outcome and how these KPIs are actually being interpreted on the ground. And so, it'll be interesting to see in future years what does come of them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with them, and this is another question we've had, is what are the rating systems and being used for sustainability-linked bonds in airports? So, I mean, my understanding of the sustainability-linked loan market at the moment, it doesn't have one consistent set of criteria, and maybe that's something that needs to come to give it more legitimacy and credibility, like you've seen with green bonds, so that you've actually got a consistent, and this feeds to James' point, a consistent set of understanding about what a sustainability-linked loan actually is, because I think they've been done differently by different institutions, and so they're not actually one homogenous product when you talk about it. But you kind of end up with every airport's different, and so what are the outcomes going to be there? I don't know, Andrew, did you want to add anything to that?
From our perspective, it's actually just commercially viable. So it's just at this stage quicker and easier for us to do the program straight up and instead of looking into the funding options. I look at the sustainability-linked loans and the bonds. I think our Treasury team are looking at that when they do the next round of fund signing. But at this stage, it's just a capital project we can find and just get the return that we need. I think we're trying to speed the process up, so we just go and do it ourselves at the moment. I think we get to a time where the low-hanging fruit, so a lot of Australian airports that took over from the federal government back in '97, we're sort of rolling out end-of-life projects. So when we start doing the next round, I think that's when the public funding assistance may come into play.
Yeah. And we've got kind of a blue sky question here. So how will the industry address the higher energy needs of future lower carbon flight less hydrocarbon-based fuels options like electric propulsion or hydrogen propulsion. As we saw, the carbon from flight is by far the largest contributor to carbon in aviation. Aircraft and engine manufacturers and airlines are key, but the infrastructure will need to be there for the new technologies, as they may be significant in comparison to the buildings and other facilities. So I guess this is looking to what's coming and where the future is. Jane, do you feel like starting with this one? Just throw that over to you.
Look, I think there's probably two components to this. It's one, we deliberately, as part of our research, really focused on the technologies that are existing in the market at the moment. And I think, first off, it'd be great to see probably more of those technologies adopted throughout the market. Moving forward into the future, obviously we need to there needs to be a lot of R&D and innovation to, I suppose, enable this, move towards reduction of particularly aircraft emissions. It is it's a pretty complex problem, and it's I think bigger than the airport or the airlines themselves. And I think really goes comes down to state and federal guidance and funding. So. Look, I'd be really interested to see, from a federal perspective, a transition guideline, I suppose, similar to the work that we've done, which really kind of outlines really the unified pathway, I suppose, towards airport sustainability. So I probably haven't answered the question there, but it's a very, very complex one. I do apologise.
Yeah. I think there's probably a need for consistency, though, and I think that's something which often can really make those changes happen, like you can see with some of the airports in Europe through having more consistent legislation, or the American ones, and federal support. They actually get to try some of the new technologies earlier and can have some good results from them, but they're given the sort of protection in that, whereas in that environment where that doesn't really come out of the environment here, the regulatory environment here. Yeah,
so I suppose there's two ways of addressing it really. It's through a regulatory, environment, as Julia mentioned there, but also, you've then got the market-based approach as well, and, it's about kind of asking, well, what are the drivers for these transitions within the market at the moment, are we, are electricity prices going up? Yes, they are. Okay. Do we have a price on carbon? Well, no, but can we use other kind of pricing mechanisms to, facilitate those transitions? So I think with the current, particularly the, issues that we're facing around climate change in particular, that's actually forcing people to look more innovatively and look at other technologies.
And Andrew, do you want to add anything to that, or are you?
Yeah, I think I agree. Just the market will drive a lot of regulatory requirements. Of course, the air will come through. The airlines will want its own reductions, which will drive the airports to do things as well. And then you're going to find the airport associations of the world will try and push for regulatory change within the local states, and I reckon that's where we're the driver. And from our perspective, we are keeping an eye on how things are moving. Always in the back of our mind when we do our master plans, any other planning, that, all right, we see Rolls-Royce will develop its electric engine by 2035, all right, how does that look in our timelines and our infrastructure? So we are keeping an eye on it, but once the market really makes a move, we'll see a big jump of airports actually doing more to cater for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we've got another one, which is about Scope 3, and talk about, being part of a larger transport story at an airport, not just the flights getting out of the airport, but everyone getting to and from the airport, including people, cargo, staff, etc. So some of the things that I was interested in doing this report are what are the best ways to reduce or influence Scope 3 emissions at airports, and how can the airport put infrastructure in place that's going to enable a reduction in Scope 3 emissions. And I think, some of the findings for me were around it's difficult. You've got a difficult situation with how the fuelling arrives in Australia, but is that ready to take biofuels? Is it something that's possible with the infrastructure, even if there's a sort of commercial negotiation to be undertaken? Can things be done around, and I think around parking and transport to and from the airport? So there's sort of things to think about there. Can there be more electric? I guess if you were counting the BAC ones as scope 1 now for the buses, I don't know if that would also be counted as scope 1 if you were taking buses from the car park into the terminal, or whether that gets put into your scope 3. Yeah. So there's probably, and then there's all the users around the airport, so the warehousing and catering, other parties that come into the mix. So I feel like in an ideal world, the airport could have the infrastructure in place that would support sort of lower emissions from those users. I think, James, have you got some?
Yeah, I think for scope 3 emissions actually take up quite a lot of the emissions of an Australian airport compared to airports internationally, mainly because often things like ground support equipment is outsourced. So the airports themselves don't necessarily have direct control over those operators, and it might be the same with buses and those kind of things as well. So I think trying to influence the procurement, the supply chain as much as you can is one of the key ways you can reduce scope 3 emissions. The other two big scope 3 emissions areas is with the landing and takeoff of aircraft. So obviously that would need to that really, the only way that airports can really, I suppose, address that is through obviously reducing I suppose things like the angle of descent and ascent, and making sure that planes aren't obviously queued up to land or take off for that matter. So it's about efficient scheduling, other than obviously to innovate the planes themselves. The other one with surface access emissions, that I think is through the airports themselves and the state governments and the various transport authorities working together to fix any things like traffic jams and prioritise things like public transport access, which will make significant dents in that space. So I think they're the key scope 3 emissions. And
maybe, one of the really obvious examples of that happening live that comes to mind is what Brisbane Airport did with the biofuels, enabling the biofuel trials with Virgin. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to talk about that briefly before we finish up.
So it was a good trial to push to see. It was more looking at how can we make it an industry in Queensland. So what are the sources, the stocks that we can do, transport distance, etc. So that sort of whole pilot study was determined, all right, it's feasible at the moment. It's a little bit away, just compared to the current price of Jet A1 that's there now, but we're looking to see that it's coming to get there. And we're finding that a lot of the other states are looking into the US, of course, are quite pushing that, particularly California, and a lot of the European flights are now coming that way. And there'll just be a time when that will be a significant push, that it will be a market advantage from the airport to provide that fuel, whereas particularly with Corsair coming through, if you're not an airport that hasn't got that, well, you could be seen as additional costs. So, and just agreeing with what James said regarding the options, so things like looking at ground power units, to get electric ground power units, and you could have preconditioned air, which will reduce the APU usage at the gate, proper flight management, all that sort of jazz is something that airports can do to reduce the scope 3 airside emissions, and just enabling things like you can have low emissions gate. That's a market advantage. So the airlines that provide the low emissions aircraft will get preference to gates. So that's something that is happening over in Copenhagen at the moment as well. So there's a lot of opportunities that airports have got if they really want to drive that scope 3 reduction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I think we'll wrap up the questions there because we're running to schedule, or just about to finish the session. Thanks everyone for your time today. I'm really pleased so many people dialed in and were participating in the Q&A session. Thank you particularly to James and to Andrew for really adding colour around the report and what actually happens on the ground at an airport. What we'll be doing is sending out the slides and a quick survey following the webinar, and the report is available on the CEFC website if you want to download it. And that's probably pretty much a wrap, so thank you everyone.